Hello, this session is all about Othello. There'll be two about Othello. And before I get started, Happy New Year, and I hope it's a very successful year for you. When I started teaching, I think there were still dinosaurs roaming the land in 1988, and we were given a brief that in the language classroom, we were not to do anything to do with sex, politics, or religion, which would mean that I could not have taught Othello because it has all of those elements in it and very prominently. Right near the beginning of the play, we hear Othello described as a black ram tapping a white ewe. So not only is there racism and sexism, but they're both debased and compared to animals. Othello is also described as having been baptized, but as someone who would quite willingly give up his Christian promises. So he's not described by the white characters as a man of faith. There are frequent references to sin, devils, damnation, and it's quite uncomfortable as a modern audience who are hopefully more sensitized to this sort of prejudice. It's quite uncomfortable for us to read the story. But just remember that Brabantio is not Shakespeare. And what Shakespeare is giving us in the story of Othello is a representation of what society was like in that time. If you've ever been outside of the cool crowd, if you've ever been marginalized on the basis of gender, intellect, sporting prowess, sexuality, if you've ever lived on the fringes, you know what Othello was experiencing. So he was adored as a charismatic military leader. He was respected for his bravery. He was admired because he'd seen so much of the world. And he was quite exotic, this dark-skinned man in European society. He had seen places and people that the average Venetian had only heard of, if that. So in many respects, he was revered as this strong military leader. And he was invited to homes like Brabantio's and wined and dined and lavished with praise and wonderful food and compliments until the point where he elopes with Desdemona. So to me, it's as if he's welcomed, at best, tolerated, but don't cross the boundary. Don't think that you are one of us as a white citizen of Venice. So if you've ever been on the fringes, you know how that feels, that people might use you for your advice on homework or tests, but on a whim, they'll just discard you. And Othello, as an adult, had that sense of being extremely vulnerable, despite the fact that he's this tough, manly leader, commander. He's still extremely vulnerable. And the society is depicted as quite fickle. Othello would be invited to Brabantio's home and treated as royalty, as a celebrity. And he would tell them stories about his travels to exotic lands, and he would hold them captive. They would just adore listening to his stories, but he mustn't cross the line and think that he could marry a white woman. Something that's also quite uncomfortable is this idea of picking on someone. You'll use them to lead the military forces, but the moment that you sense they're not towing the line, you will turn on them and that person will be ostracized or killed. So when you have a look at the play, just have your senses on high alert for references to sin, the devil, crimes, vulnerability, racism, debased language. In many respects, it's quite a savage story, a violent story. And we don't like to think of human beings as being that superficial. But Othello really, in many respects, is a victim of this extremely prejudiced society. And what makes it quite complex is that he's not entirely blameless. We're never quite sure of why he doesn't ask Brabantio for his daughter's hand in marriage, why they run away to be married rather than having a formal court wedding. As much as he is this brilliant commander of the armed forces and praised for his strategic analysis of battles, how could someone that clever, that tactical, be such a passive victim to a manipulator like Iago? So there are lots of ways you can have a look at the story. One is Othello a victim of this very prejudiced society? Is he a villain? Someone who actually could not control his base desires and then his violent desires either. Is society extremely prejudiced, and so anyone who's an outsider is destined to suffer, be shunned, be killed? Or is it more complicated? Are there multiple forces at play? Forces that involve love, passion, sex, prejudice, hate, malice, justice. So don't think of it as merely a play rooted in the 1600s. It is. Shakespeare's giving us a slice of life. But also think of what the storyline, the characters and the plot element are telling you about those issues in today's times. Thank you. If you enjoyed this talk, please like and subscribe. There will be more. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.